Hi guys, today we'll be building out a creative advertising Copilot, essentially an agent that allows for any brand owner or agency team to scale volume of creatives for their ad campaigns. I've been in the brand marketing and advertising space for over 15 years, and without a doubt in my mind, the quality of your creatives is one of the highest determining factors in whether your campaign succeeds or fails. In the past few years, the complexity has increased because it's not just about the quality of your creatives anymore, but it is also the velocity as well as the variance of those creatives, right? In order for you to be successful on Meta, that is the name of the game today. And this is where AI really comes in because when it comes to speed and variance and volume, AI is exceptional. Where traditional design teams will need to go through a creative pipeline that will require multiple people and multiple handoffs, you can essentially run a lot of these pipelines using LLMs. But today, what I'm going to do is to show you you don't actually need a lot of those tools, and you can be building a lot of these workflows and these creative pipelines expertise on Claude Code itself. Yeah. So the challenge for today's build isn't just around producing en masse, right? But ensuring that when we get our agent to work through the production of these assets, that we never drop below a certain threshold in terms of quality, and obviously avoiding the highly undesirable outcome of producing a lot of AI slop. Yeah. So yeah, that's basically the scope for today. Let's get to it. Okay, what we will be working towards today as an output is an agent that will be able to mass produce about 50-ish creatives in about 1 to 2 hours. Yeah. And the workflow that we are looking to deploy has got a few stages. The first stage is the ideation phase. Second phase is going to be pre-production. And what I mean by pre-production is different from how we conventionally would be thinking about production in the conventional sense, right? This would be the creation of prompts. It would be the copywriting that will need to be paired with each ad. And then finally, it's the production phase, which is the generation of the ads itself. So these would be sequential flows. And if you think about how you would be working with an agent, think about it as like part one, ideating, part two, preparing your agent to then go ahead, and part three, produce. Now, each of these will have some detailing in terms of the workflow that we will be building today. But before we get into each of them, there are a few things that I think it's important for us to be aware of when it comes to the volume of what we're trying to produce in this workflow with this agent. And that is to say that when it comes to LLMs, the challenge that you will be finding if you're trying to create volume and variance is that LLMs have a tendency, based on how it is designed, to revert to the mean, or in other words, revert to the average, right? And this is anything that it produces for you, whether it is a very simple output in the form of a response. So you ask it a question, it gives you an answer. You ask it to produce a video for you. You ask it to produce a an image for you, an ad for you in this case, like it will always revert towards the mean, right? That's just the nature of how these probabilistic models work. Once in a while, you will get anomalies, right? That sits outside of the mean, and that's important for us to bear in mind when we're building the workflows later. But the idea is to acknowledge the fact that LLMs will have this tendency, right, to just respond to you within this space, okay? And the goal for us really is, how do we build a workflow around this to get the outputs that we want, that delivers variance. Velocity is a given because what we're trying to do is 50 assets in 1 to 2 hours. But more importantly, we want to avoid the average and the mean, and what people have been talking about overwhelmingly on the social medias these days is the creation of AI slop. Yeah, just keep that in mind in terms of the fundamental design of how LLMs work. And I'll explain through some of the design decisions that we will go through in order to combat the basics of how LLMs work, right? So the first thing and the most important step actually in building out this agent is actually, when it comes to getting to where we want to go, is the ideation phase. Yeah, so this is the most important crucial step. So we'll spend more time on ideation than we will on the other parts of the production phase, because this is where everything is downstream from ideation. If we're going to be producing 50 ads, we need to have 50 novel, great, solid ideas. So hence ideation being the most important. But even before we get into ideation, what we need to be prepared with when deploying any workflow or any agent for that matter is context. Okay, what I mean by context in this case, if we're going to be creating a whole bunch of ads, we need to be giving our model, our agents, background information about the brand that we are working on. Whether you are in an agency or a service provider environment where you're handling multiple clients, or you're working for the brand itself, or it is your own brand, what you need to be doing is giving it context about the brand. What category are you playing in? What is your brand's positioning in relation to your competitors? Your target audience, what are their pain points? What does your brand look like? How does your brand speak? All of that becomes really valuable information that you will add to your models, your agent, so that your average and mean is not just the generic average or mean, but it is the average mean. So the evolution is not just the slop, just produce me any ad for category X. It is produce me an ad for the category, for my brand, to solve the problems of my target audience, right? In a way that looks like my brand colors. The copy is written in the way that my brand speaks. So again, it is tuning the mean to your specific context. So before we talk about ideation workflows, the preparation that needs to happen will be building your context. And generally, you would have a folder inside of your workspace or your repo or your vault, whatever you want to call it. And then within it, you will have a whole bunch of markdown files. And you could have subfolders within it that will cover examples, will cover visuals specific to your brand guidelines for the brand that you're working on, right? So a couple of examples of what we will plug in here will be things like, say, companywiki.md. We will have, and within your company wiki, you would have things like your positioning, right? But if you don't have your positioning within there, you can put your brand positioning.md. You have your target audience, and then this could be a target audiences.md, right? So if you have multiple segments, which you should, you will have things like a folder, right, within it. And this is going to be a smaller one. So this would be slash brand book, brand guidelines. And then within brand guidelines, you would have, you know, a PDF file like your brand book PDF. And then very important, you will probably want to have a tone of voice .md. And if you don't have a brand book, you can break this down into like visual identity or a design.md. The point, and again, this can be pretty long, right? The more context that you have, the more you're going to be able to tune your models or your agent towards building something that is very much aligned to what you are trying to produce from a creative and an ad standpoint, right? And then the last one will be examples. So this would be examples of what good ads look like. And these might be example 1.png, example 2.png, and you might even have things like references 1.png. So these might be ads that you like, right? But kind of represent your brand, but like maybe you're on Pinterest or you saw something on Meta Ads library and you think that, hey, that's an interesting idea. Again, you can also collect that. And then what happens is if you give this as context to your LLMs to reproduce, it will reproduce in your brand style. And then finally, what you would also want to have eventually, maybe not at the start, or I won't be able to show you this, but you will probably have something like creative performance.md. Because this document will house all of your learnings from your previous ad campaigns on what has worked, what doesn't work, what to avoid, etc. So again, this is not exhaustive, but these are the things at the bare bones minimum that you would want to prepare. And the better these are written, the better your outputs ultimately will be. Okay? So this is preparation and context. And just to reiterate why we're doing this is so that your average is tuned to your context. Cool. Now, getting on to the ideation stage. When we think about ads and we think about variance, a few things comes to mind. The first one is understanding the archetype of your ad. And what I mean by this is you will probably have in your ad campaigns funnels, right? If you kept it really, really simple, you would have upper funnel and lower funnel. So upper funnel is to generate demand and lower funnel is to capture demand. The nature of how these ads are designed, created, and the key message that is delivered would be quite different, right? Your bottom of funnel ads will tend to have more call to action heavy. There could be promotions, limited time offers, right? That's where your offer lives to get someone to act today. Whereas your upper to mid funnel types of ads, there's a higher level of variance that could live in that bucket. Could be things like feature archetypes, product shots, right? You could have things like social proof. We have 2,000 reviews and our average score is 4.8 stars. And then you have call to action, right? So if we think about archetypes as generally just buckets, and if we're going to be creating variance at the highest level, we are breaking things down by the different ad archetypes. then what you would want to do is you would want to add your brand, positioning, and key messaging. So based on your position and the associations that your brand is trying to own, this next quarter is going to be talking about key message X, key message Y, right? So you have this as well as an input. And finally, the last piece of the puzzle is going to be creative performance, right? So what that does is it creates a frame from which ideation is probably easier. Your ideation can play within this space, right? Because what you would want to do is you would want to make sure that you are building the brand based on your intentions, your goals, your strategy. You want to make sure that whatever that you ideate is backed by certainty that it will work, right? So it won't think about ideas that historically has not worked before. It has a lean towards things that has worked, right? And then obviously you would want to then have enough variance based on your marketing strategy so that you are attacking both in demand generation as well as demand capture. So that's your offer and your call to action. And then this is your space, right, to generate ideas. Again, if we go back to what we're trying to do here, we are trying to generate ideas within the box. Yeah? So this is the box that we are creating. So then from a workflow standpoint, what are we ultimately building? First of all, what you need to do is you will need to make sure that the right context is loaded, right? So you begin, let's just say this is a session start. In fact, I'm going to use a different session start. It's usually denoted by a circle. And then this is where the user provides the initial prompt in terms of scope and brief and key message, maybe briefing, actually campaign briefing, right? Because what will happen is, like I was saying, there could be certain things that are more time-based. Like this quarter, we are focusing on driving this association. So that's what happens in the campaign briefing side of things. Okay. So the session start. And the goal for us really is to have X number of creative concepts, right? And creative concepts are basically ideas inside here, right? Again, different people will call this different things. And in order for us to get here, we go through a workflow. Now, the starting point for this is when you put in the initial prompt, the first thing that you need to do is to then make sure that you are loading the right context. So that means context, brand positioning, MD, company wiki, .md, This is where your past campaign performance. And these would be like the pretty basic stuff, right? Again, just showing you some of these key pieces here. And actually the last piece of the puzzle that's also important for context is target audience actually. We left that one out. Okay, so then what you'll also be doing is you'll be adding target audience.md. So all of these documents needs to be loaded as context at the start of the session, and we will go through how we will go about doing that when we build the agent. But then what needs to happen is the agent needs to then go and help you think through ideas, right? Now, if we go back to this diagram here, and by understanding how LLMs tend to behave and work, what you will find is even if you have tuned the average, the mean to your context, you will still find a lot of clusters of ideas, and that works against variance, if you get what I mean. Because again, you're just going to be getting stuff that is close to the average, which means to say if your goal is to create 50 unique pieces of creative concepts or ideas, you need to reach out for the stuff that is within the edges, right? Or even further out would be better. And the way that we will handle this is the utilization of a couple of tactics. The first one is we generate volume. What LLMs are really good at is volume and velocity out of the box. So the more you produce, the more chances you are able to find the stuff that is outside of the mean. Because again, it's a standard distribution, right? Most of your ideas will live close to the mean, but then your 8th or 9th idea will be out of the mean. So what you want to do is you want to be generating a high volume of generations. And the way that we do this is that we do not leverage a sequential workflow pattern. Instead, what we do is we run our workflow in parallel. What does this mean? Basically, we use subagents as a solution for us. And we can run up to 10 subagents at a go. But the idea is to have these distribute out, fan out, if you want to call it that. These agent will produce within the mean. This agent will produce something that is novel and different, right? And we basically scale up the number of parallel ideation via subagents within the session itself. And again, I'm just giving an illustration here to use for subagents, but really what you want to be doing is you want to be using 20, 30 subagents at a go so that you are able to really leverage volume so that you're finding the gems at the edge, right? Then the other pattern that you will then want is you want all of these subagents to then converge into one processor for novel ideas. Because what you might find is that subagent 1 and 2 might produce something that is quite similar, right? So then you want to deduplicate that and you're just getting a set of novel ideas, okay? So that is the first tactic that we will use. The second tactic that we will use is what I call framing. And this leverages the idea of how we used to be prompt engineering, sending those really long prompts. And the first thing that you would include in your very long prompt is a role. And the way to think about this is that for every subagent that you spin up, give it a role, right? And what that means is that I can use different framings, spin up more subagents, right? To then tune what this average looks like. What does this mean? Essentially, I will have average tuned to your context, produced by a edgy creative director. So imagine we are running 10 generations, 10 ideas as the edgy creative director. Then we run another 10 more as a numbers-driven creative director. And then maybe we have a third frame, which is award-winning creative director. So when you swap out the frames and you're running multiple generations, and each generation here is, you run 10 of them, right? What ends up happening is you might get one gem here, here, and here. But then what you're doing is you are generating 10 here, you're generating 10 here from a different frame, and then you're generating another 10 more from a different frame altogether. So 3 frames, 10 generations each. And what you do is you aggregate to deduplicate, right? Let's use this instead. And then all of a sudden, you might end up, let's just say, the deduplication is 70%, right? Meaning to say that 30% of them is ruled out because of deduplication. What you land with is 30 times 0.7, which is not too bad, right? You get about 21 ideas. And you can see now you are getting to the volume of ideas that will get you to your 50 ads, right? So if we go back to this here and we expand this a bit more into calling them, I'm just gonna, for simplicity's sake, remove 1 to show the workflow that we're looking to build here. Frame 2, frame 3. Okay. And again, you can add as many frames as you want. And how you go about the frame is pretty open, right? You can run more frames, you can have those frames be on a spectrum, right? So that could be an edgy spectrum. It could be a numbers versus creative freedom spectrum. So on one end, on the extreme end, you're just following the numbers. On the other extreme end is you're just following the most novel ideas. And then that's basically the spectrum of how you create different frames on a scale 1 to 5, for example. And then within them, you would have subagent 1 all the way to subagent 10. I will color code these so you can see. Maybe make it smaller. And then these will be red. What color did I use here? So that's consistency, green and orange. Orange. Okay, and then this goes back to black. Subagent 1. And we will connect these as like a sort of like to show that they are, it's basically a range, right? Frame 1, frame 2, and frame 3. So then what you will end up having here is you would have 10 ideas. Each. I'll call them concepts, whatever. That's the output. And then like what I was showing earlier, we will have a process of deduplication. And we'll use a black box. Aggregate. Deduplicate. Refine, maybe. Right? And let's assume that your hit that removes about 30%. You get a final 21 ideas. Okay, ish. So 21 ideas, that gets us to about we're quite shy of 50. So what do we do now? Right? If let's just, this is the case. And again, like you can tune this model to however you see fit, which I mean, right now I'm just using 3 frames. You could use 5, 10 frames. You could run multiple subagents or more subagents, so 20 subagents to produce even more ideas to get to your number. But the other thing that we can do is we can actually ask it for each idea create variance. And again, when we think about creating variances, you could very much just use the same orchestrator to then go and tweak the 21 ideas to double it up, to triple it up, right? And in this case, the example that I'm going to give in this workflow is I'm going to say create 3 variances per idea. So what that means is that it might, for the concept, which is an awareness concept, that's a product that has got this key message, what are the different angles that we can attack it, right? So we could create variances through different angles. And I say I want 3 variances per idea. Okay? That gets you from 21 ideas to about 63 ideas. The other thing that you can do, which is again using the same pattern that we have here, is you can actually go and ask it to use the same framing to create variances. Maybe you really like frame 3, and what you're doing is you are creating different frames to generate you your first set of ideas, and then you're using frame 3 to then expand on the variances. So these could be quite varied, but what you want is a very edgy, maybe your brand has got a very edgy kind of feel to it. And if frame 3 is the edgy frame, you can then apply frame 3 to then generate more variances. So you can see how you can use the concepts from the earlier parts to then apply to this stage, right? And you can then repeat over and over and over again until you get the outputs that you want. Like what I was saying, ideate stage is the one that is probably the most free form in how you would be orchestrating your agents in order for you to get to your output, right? And there really is no right way of doing it. It's personal, in my opinion, and it's really what works best for you. The other part that we need to consider when building out the ideation workflow is at what point do we have human gates, right? And what do I mean by human gates? Basically, at what point is the human in the loop? The approval stage, right? Which is once it's maybe aggregated and refined before it goes and produces more variances and angles, you will have a human approval gate. Or maybe this is like feedback, right? So then you can say, I like this idea, but I need you to tweak this word, for example. And then maybe you have one final one at the end. Now, again, a lot of it is really dependent on how you prefer to work and the trade-offs that you are willing to accept, which is the more approval gates you have, the less automated and the less speed you will get, but it should deliver a higher level of quality to what your intentions are. So it's really that trade-off, and you will probably start off with more human approval gates, and then over time, as you gain a higher level of confidence in the system, the workflow, the agent's ability to deliver high quality ideas, that's when you begin to remove approval gates, right? I think I have covered most of it. What I will add as a part of this workflow, and the reason why I want to make sure that I'm pretty detailed is because what I will do is I will be feeding this entire diagram, right, to Claude later, to the agent when we build it. So this is the ideation phase. One key detail here would be conversation with agent on deciding on clarifying questions, actually, plus framing. And part of what you can do, even optional, okay, is you could have creative director archetypes for framing, right? So if you have loaded that at the start of your context, then when you have that conversation with your agent, okay, so that's one step in between. It's somewhere around here, right? When you have that conversation with it, you don't have to detail out what the framing is. Maybe you have certain frames that you really like based on your loops and iterations of going through different sessions with it. So you've got your favorite framing archetypes that's already loaded. And then you basically say, okay, I want frame 1, 2, and 3, but let's skip 4 and 5 today, right? So yeah, this is the workflow for ideation. Okay, so now moving on to the next stage, which is pre-production. What we're looking to do within the pre-production phase is to do two parts. we've got the creative concepts and the ideas. And what we will want to do in this stage is we need to convert those concepts or ideas into a production brief. Okay, so part one of it is the creation of a production brief per idea. And essentially what this is in AI development workflows is nothing more than a prompt that you will then send over to your LLM model to go ahead and produce, right? So really, this is nothing more than a prompt. Now, there will be specific criteria around what that prompt will look like. For example, best practice in the industry right now is to provide nano banana to the prompt in a JSON format, and to provide a tremendous amount of high detail around what is it that you're expecting your background image to look like, right? Then the other criteria would be to make sure to include white space in composition. So what's happening here is at the end of the ideation phase, what is missing actually is tool slash, we can maybe call this campaigns brief, campaign ideas, right? Let's just call it that. And you've got 63 of them. .md actually. So it's not a folder, but what you would have is you would have a campaign ideas.md that then gets pushed into the creation of a production brief per idea. And what we want to do is we want to convert each idea into a background prompt. And that's basically like, what are you saying inside of the ad itself? So everything that we'll be creating today will be statics as opposed to any other variants. And we will standardize the types of formats to 9 by 16, right? Or 3 by 4. And then if we wanted to, we can reproduce into different sizes after as a next step, as a final step. We won't cover that with the agent today. That will be additional builds, which will be fairly simple to do. So really for us, it's just about the creation of those 50 statics. And the way that we will be piecing that together is in two parts. One is the production brief per idea, and this is really to create the background, the image. And then the second part is create the copy. Okay? So what are we doing here? Essentially, we have our campaign ideas MD file. We will then go ahead, and in fact, I think a better way for us to do this is to actually attack the copy first, right? And without going into too much detail, each campaign idea gets a final creative copy. And the way that you will be developing this, actually we're just building this as we go. A copywriting skill. And like what I was saying, the purpose of today isn't to go through the details around writing a effective copywriting skill. There's probably a lot of them out there on the internet that you can copy and adapt for yourself, or you can just get Claude to write something for your own. that fits your approach to doing copywriting, right? But basically, you go from campaign ideas through run it through a copywriting skill to get you your final creative copy. This should then go into creative copies folder, and each creative copy should have an identifier. So what you would do is you would have, maybe call it campaign name, and you could have idea, variant, right? And the reason why you would want to have a very specific naming is because of the next step, the steps that will come to follow, where we will need to match the asset created with the background image that's created. Of course, within the copywriting skill itself, one thing to bear in mind is that you would probably want to have all of these context documents injected into the skill. So that's part of the skill design, which means to say you can convert a lot of this quite easily. Optional would be if you could even add things like client wiki. Actually, target audience would be good. So if your target audience has, in your target audience documentation, you have how the audience likes to be spoken to, right? That could add color as well. But basically what you have is you have your creative copies, you will have special slugs for them, and then you then go on to your next piece of the puzzle, which is actually to create the production brief, the image production brief actually, per idea. Can remove that for now. And this is yet another skill. And this would be probably called an idea to prompt skill. And what I deleted earlier was the format of it, right? Which is JSON format, highly detailed, covers composition to include white space. And the reason why this is important is so that your ad copy has a place to go. And then this also gets saved. We're not using this. This gets saved into a /prompts. And what you will have is you would have the exact same thing, but this would be JSON. And yeah, really quite simple. The idea behind this really, and where the magic happens for this specific stage, is in the quality of your skill writing. And again, like if you have your own copywriting capabilities and skills, then by all means use it. If your agency has one, if your colleague has one, then again, this is where it goes. The idea to prompt skill will be relatively basic. It's just a workflow that says, hey, can you go and take each campaign idea, build it out into an image prompt based on that idea, right? And make sure to deploy it in a JSON format. Make sure to also to provide a high amount of detail. So things like what camera to use if you're using photography shots, what lighting conditions, high fidelity background detail, etc. Right? Now, one option to hedge against quality is that within this idea to prompt skill, what you could actually be doing is you could actually be getting each idea to, or each idea and each variant to have two different prompts, right? And again, we use the same concepts as here in this stage, where we are fanning out and getting multiple variants to be created. What we can essentially do here is in the idea to prompt skill, we could say, add to this, right? Two prompt variants for each idea. So what that means is that for your creative copies, the same creative copy will be used for different background images. But yeah, that's an option for you to increase your 63 ideas into 126 variants. So you have 126 assets at the end of the process, which would be a lot for you to choose from, assuming that you only choose half or less than half of them as your final set of assets. You would still have more than 50, right? So yeah, that's the pre-production stage. Basically, you're just prepping the key components of what allows for you to produce the assets at the end, right? In the production stage, it's basically preparation, prompt creation, creative copy creation. And in this stage, right, this is, again, within this skill, you will once again be ensuring that your context is injected, right? So in this case, you want to make sure that your actual creative copy is injected into the idea to prompt skill. So then whatever that gets produced at this stage knows what the message will be in the ad itself. And then from here, what would be really, really helpful would be to give it examples. You would also be giving it brand book, stuff from your brand book, so it knows how to use things like photography. It knows how to use things like the brand elements, your distinctive brand assets, and there's examples of how to deploy it well. And optional would be things like brand positioning as well, if you have one, right? So that is the kind of context that you'll be injecting into your skills to make sure that all of your different context documents here are properly used, right? And again, this is where things like target audience can also be valuable. So brand book is the example I've given is brand book of PDF. So we'll keep that consistent here. And then you would have target audience .d, right? So every step of the way, what you're having is context that's injected. All right, so that's pre-production done. Let's now get into the final step, which is post-production. Okay. In the production stage, the approach that I'm taking here is to leverage Val AI, specifically using Nano Banana Pro or Nano Banana 2 to generate a lot of these images. Now you can use via Val AI, you can be using all kinds of different models, but the current industry standard is Nano Banana, which is Google's image generation model. The second thing is we will be laying out all of our assets into Figma. And the way that we will connect our agent to Figma is using an MCP called Figma Console MCP. Now, for Fel AI, there are MCPs, or you can actually just pipe in directly via API. I will probably be piping in via API. MCPs are simpler to deploy, but in my experience, less token efficient in how it works, right? So for me, the design choice is keep it simple, or rather like, keep it efficient, and let's run it via the API because your agent will be intelligent enough to set it up for you. But these are the two pieces of the puzzle that we will be building around. Okay, so to start off, what we have is we have our prompts. And within the prompts, you will have a very large number the goal here is once again to create another skill. And we can even call this skill, let's just call it create add. And then within this skill itself, it has all of the instructions to leverage Fel AI, right? So each of the prompts goes into create add skill. So all the circles are basically skills lah. And that's how it's been designed. Within the create add skill, you will also want it to ingest context, right? And this is probably the most important step to ensure that the generations are going to be of quality, and that is to give it your brand book, visual identity guidelines, perhaps .mv. You will also have examples, right? So this is where all of that goes. And the goal here is to ensure that all of this is ingested by Nano Banana when executing on each of your prompts. And then what happens is all of this gets delivered into an outputs folder. /outputs. And that's going to be, you can call them this and call it PNG, right? And then you have number 2 PNG, and again this would be a total number of something like 63 or 100 plus, right? There will be 126 of them. And basically what happens is it gets pushed into Fel, ingests all of your context, and it saves each image inside /outputs. And then what we will then have is the other folder you remember, which is /creative copies. Within here, you've got campaign idea variant.md. And the final step, which would be another skill actually, and this one will be called creative assembly skill. Which connects Figma console MCP, which uses Figma console, okay, to then take and match each variant with the creative copy and then pushing that over to a Figma design board. And what we would want to do is we would want to make sure to give it the prompt to say that creative copies and fill white space. Actually, the first step is to match using file IDs. Then we creative copy to fill in white space. And in fact, this is actually instructions in the skill itself. And the final thing is to place them in a, let's just say 10 by X into a grid. So what that means is that you would have all of your assets stacked in a grid format where each image will then be layered on top with the creative copy, and the creative assembly skill will go ahead and scan both folders for all files and then match them and then place them into the Figma design board, right? So then the final step, and this is a design choice that I've elected to add, which is human edits. Human in the loop edits, actually. Let's call it that. What the human in the loop edits basically is we will be going onto Figma and we will be rearranging where the creative copies are, right? Like, for example, we don't expect immediately that it will get the placement of the ad copies in the right place, the creative copies in the right place. So this additional step ensures that we are able to make those minor edits that allows for us to, at the end of the day, produce this at scale really quickly, but give it the fine-tuning touch that only a human can do using our own eyes and judgment. And if any of these images require some touch-up, Figma is an extremely powerful tool that allows for you to make those final 5 to 10% edits. And we found that this is probably one of the best ways to circumvent some of the pain points of having to occasionally get the agent to reproduce something and you end up going in loops because it just can't get it right, which can be very easily solved if you just had some power to edit. And hence we are using Figma in this entire workflow as the end step, right? So if we really look through this entire process, one of the important things really is understanding where the human gates ultimately are. And like what I was saying earlier, a lot of these human in the loop or humanistic aspects can begin to be removed once you have a higher degree of confidence that this agent is giving you the outputs that you are expecting, right? So there you have it. You have your build from the ideation to pre-production to then the production phase. What I'm going to do is I'm going to clean up this entire diagram so that I can get one full shot of it. And then we will then head over to Claude Code to then build this entire agent from scratch, given all of the work that we have done here today. Okay, here we have it. the entire workflow cleaned up. I've made some minor amendments and added a couple of things so that whatever that we feed to Claude will be as accurate as possible to how I envision the workflow being executed and coming to life. A couple of things that I will note in terms of additions would be within your context, you would have your creative director frames. You will also have add archetypes, so that's your product ads, your feature ads, your offer ads. So those come from here, right? And we won't be building all this at length. We will just maybe run a couple of examples for the demo. But yeah, apart from that, a bit of cleaning up in terms of how the workflow is presented and giving it a bit more clarity around the human in the loop side of things, where there will be an initial prompt, there will be a conversation with the agent to clarify questions and the framing. So what frames do you want to use? What kind of ads, archetypes are you looking to produce? So that will be a conversation that is had before the work begins. Yeah. And then talking about loading different types of contexts. And this is the part where, as the conversation is evolving, more context is loaded, right? And in fact, what I should do is I should add let Claude know around loading more context as conversations unfold. And the way that I want you guys to think about this is, as opposed to having, originally we had a creative director.md, or rather a framing archetypes.md, something like that. Instead of that, what we're doing is we're breaking it into individual creative director frames. And the reason why this is important is because let's assume that you're only going to be using T1 and you're not using T2, right? You don't want to load the entire thing into your context window. So that's the progressive disclosure discipline that we want to be building into all of our agents when we build new agents or refine existing agents. But yeah, apart from that, it's just ensuring that it is one cohesive workflow. All skills are in circles, so it knows that it needs to create 4 skills. Yeah, I think we should be good to go in terms of just copy and pasting each of these into Claude for us to go ahead and begin building. I've highlighted the different phases in the process here and routing it to specific files and specific folders across the entire workflow. So let's go ahead and build. Right, so today we will be building using VS Code. And the reason why I'm looking to build with VS Code is because I'm able to see all of the folders and files as they're being built out over here on the left side. So that gives me a bit more ease in terms of understanding progressively how it's being built out. I prefer to work out of a terminal because it allows for me to focus. But again, if you're starting from scratch, there's no harm in using VS Code. In fact, I think a lot of people prefer an environment like this where it's a bit more visual and you can actually see all of your folders and the relevant files and scripts that are a part of your build. Okay, so what I'll be doing is I will be taking a picture of this. So this is the diagram that I will send over to Claude. I can also give it this. And then I will give it this as well. This to me is relevant as well, to give it high fidelity images and understand how we are approaching this, right? And then I've got the ideation phase. And then I have the pre-production phase. And then finally, we've got the production phase here. Oh, oops. Okay. All right, so the full thing is here. I have all the files done already. So jumping back into Claude Code here. And again, like I was saying, we don't have anything in this folder. It's completely building from scratch. And I'm going to, all of these are my screenshots. I'm gonna copy them and I'm gonna paste them here. Let me do some cleanup then. Okay, today I want to spin up and create a creative Copilot agent from scratch. What I've done is I have worked out the entire workflow of the interaction between the user and this agent. I will link you a folder with a whole bunch of screenshots that shows you in detail the entire architecture of how I intend this agent to be built out. And the first step for you is to ingest all of the diagrams and come back to me with any clarifying questions that you may have. Because what we're going to be doing is we're going to be building this agent from scratch. Now, in your responses to me, I want you to explain in detail some of the design choices that you will be deploying based on the diagrams that I have given you. Because what I'm doing is I'm recording a YouTube video to show people how we can be building these agents from scratch, right? So yeah, let's get to it. So let's see how it does in terms of the fact that I'm telling it that we're recording a YouTube video and I want its responses to me to take that into account so that it's being a bit more deliberate in terms of its explanations and its responses. So yep, you can see it can read all the screenshots and it's going to understand the full architecture. And once it's processed everything, we'll be back shortly on what it's come up with. Okay, we have the full architecture, it's read it, the big picture, three-phase creative ad production. So you can tell that when you have a lot of detail going into your briefing to it, it can really extract via its visual capabilities, its vision capabilities, what you intend to create, right? And here we have some interesting choices on how it's thinking about building stuff, which is using the Claude Agent SDK. And this is where I will probably tell it, hey, we're not using the Claude Agent SDK. What we are doing instead is we're building it out of this vault, right? Clarifying questions. All right, so a few things here. We're not going to be building this using the Claude Agent SDK. Instead, what we're looking to do is to build this inside of this folder itself. Everything that you have outlined here in terms of the orchestrator, spawning parallel agents, collecting results, and the entire workflow and process, that I think can be built and deployed within the Claude.md itself. So we're not touching any Claude Agent SDK. Basically, we are creating a new repo, and we are basically going to be using Claude Code on top of this repo, and this repo should behave like an agent. So that's the first piece of feedback to it. Now I'm going to respond to it in terms of all of the questions that it has. For the image generation API, we will be using fel.ai, and specifically we will be using Nano Banana tool, using the version of Nano Banana that allows for you to have reference images. I believe that's Nano Banana Edit within Fel AI's platform. For the creative director frames, fine for you to give me examples of different personas that we can be using for different framing. The example that I have was, maybe we have a really edgy creative director, we have one that's a bit more numbers driven, and we have one that is an award-winning creative director. Or alternatively, some great ideas which you can come up with would be maybe using very famous creative directors from the ad industry in the past couple of decades to then create those frames. I think that becomes quite interesting in terms of the different frames that produces ideas. I'll leave it to you in terms of what you want to create for this. We will evolve this over time. For the human approval gate, I think what is the simplest right now would be for agent to dump all of the ideas into a markdown file so that I can read it. I will be using Obsidian to open up a lot of the markdown files for me to review. So you can probably give me checkboxes on things that I like and I don't like, so then we can interact better. So the markdown files becomes the source of truth for me to use via Obsidian, and then you can take it from there. I don't have any Figma template at the moment. What I think we should do as a standard generation is to create vertical portrait style ads to start, and those should be placed inside of a Figma design board in a grid format, like what I was showing in the diagrams. And what the assembly skill should do is it should find the white spaces inside of each ad to then go and place the creative copies within it. You can keep the layouts fairly simple, maybe a rectangle grid. We don't need to have too much detail, just a place to aggregate all of the background image ads with the creative copy. The main thing is to place the ad copy to match the creative copy with the right background, and then place the creative copies within the white space. For the scope today, we are building everything in one shot. For the creative performance.md file, this is going to be historical performance data from the campaigns, but in this current iteration and this build, we don't have any creative performance to input, so you can use this as a placeholder for now. For the 3 prompt variance per idea, now, I've given an example of 3 variants, but depending on the user, they should be able to say, I want 3 variants, or want 2 variants, or want 5 variants per concept. But the idea is all 3 of them to go into production, or rather it will go through an additional round of approvals by the human to direct what actually goes into production. So your job as the agent is to just create variance per concept, and then the final step would be for the user to then define what goes to production. As this is a pretty big project for us to build out everything at one go, I do recommend you going into plan mode to then work out the entire plan on how we would be building this agent from head to toe. And then we can work through that plan together before you go ahead and build it. So yeah, that's basically me answering all of the questions that it asked me, right? Again, some of these are relatively technical in terms of how I'm envisioning the build, but yeah, just making sure that it has everything that it needs, whether it's the diagrams or it is queries that it may have around what's missing potentially, to give it everything that it's, so it has enough context around building the thing. And what I told it at the end is to enter plan mode to then work out the entire set of things that it needs to do bit by bit so that it doesn't attempt to one-shot everything. I explicitly say enter plan mode. Now, what's great about Claude Code these days with Opus and the way that they have tuned it is that it has a preference to enter plan mode before going ahead to deploy, right? So by default, for big complex tasks like this, it would enter plan mode, but I'm just adding, as best practice, I'm just adding that in my prompt or in my response to it so that it does what I want it to do, right? So in general, it's pretty good at this, but if you want certainty and you don't want it to go down the wrong path, it doesn't harm you just giving the additional instruction to it. Okay, so right now it's going to do a whole bunch of web search. It's going to scan my computer. And what it's going to find is that actually we do have a Fel AI API key. And yeah, it's going to notice that we have the Figma MCP, we have the Fel AI done already. It will come together with all of the information from what it needs, whether it is to understand documentation on the web or is to see my setup currently on the computer. And then it'll come back to me with the plan on how it's going to deploy. So we'll just wait for it to run the entire motion of plan, and then we'll be back to review the plan before we get it to execute. So the plan's done, and let's take a look at it. It's basically building a creative Copilot, a repo. When opened with Claude Code, behaves as an autonomous creative ad production pipeline. No Claude Agent SDK. The repo itself is the agent powered by Claude.md, custom skills, custom subagents, and shell scripts for external API calls. So it's got it right. The shell script is going to be what we'll be using to call the image production models on Fel AI, right? So we've got key integrations, which is Fel AI for image generation with reference images, Figma MCP, already connected via Figma console, and Obsidian friendly markdown with checkboxes for human approval gates. So that's all the input that I gave it earlier, right? Okay, 3 phases. And then this is how it's looking at the repository. And it's gonna hit, then go and create different frames, right? David Ogilvy, Lee Clow, Bernbach, emotional rule breaker. So these will be some interesting frames, and I'll be interested to see what kind of ideas come out of these creative director frames, right? But yeah, I think this looks pretty good to me. And then we've got campaigns here, scripts. Looks good. Curl wrapper for Fel API. Okay, step 1 is a scaffold. So what it's going to do is it's going to create all the directories first. And then it's going to build the agent brain. So it's even giving me the identity, the tree workflow, human approval patterns, context loading rules. Okay, it's giving file convention names. Okay, then context files, brain templates. Let's see what it's doing. All files in context are, so replace this markers so you can fill with brand details. Great. creative director frame, 6K. Okay, so what it's doing here is it's actually creating custom subagents, and we've got subagents for copywriter. And what it's gone ahead to do is it's just broken it into more skills, right, than what I had initially recommended for it. So what I was thinking about was more of the Claude MD doing a lot of the work. But what it's doing right now, it's breaking down the ideate part of the equation. So the fan out, fan in pattern, right, is getting ingested into a ideate skill. So as a user, what ends up happening is I'll go into the agent and I'll type /ideate, and then I'll give it the brief, and then it'll run the ideate skill. Then we will go through the entire workflow here. Then after that, I will then go through the review, which I don't know if we will need to do this necessarily. And then we've got the pre-production, which just follows what I have given it instructions to do. So I'm not going to change too much of this because, again, it's quite a long workflow in terms of the build. And a better way for us to approach fixing is to just run it. I would much rather actually review first what it produces, because it could come back with a better way to approach it, right? I give it the overall direction, call it the guardrails of what I'm thinking about doing, then give its intelligence, because we are using Opus 4.6, to then build something that it believes is the most optimal for us to get to our end output, right? So let's go ahead and build it, and we'll be back once the entire repo has been built out. Basically going to execute on this entire plan here. And yeah, you've got the build order, which is scaffold, claude.md, context templates, etc. Should be fairly quick in terms of getting this to build it head to toe, because we've already done all of the pre-work, right? So yeah, we'll be back once we are done with the build. So one thing I wanted to point out when I was just reviewing a lot of this plan in detail, and this is the part where it validates what I was saying around letting the agent itself propose better ways of working. If we looked at my approach to how we are looking to do pre-production, what I had done was I asked it to basically spin up the copywriting skill, write the final creative copy, and then after that go into the idea to prompt the skill. So these are all individual skills, right? And it's a sequential workflow here. What it has done instead is it's recommended a more efficient workflow, which is interesting to me because what it's doing is it's using subagents. So it's going to read the approved ideas, and then it's going to spawn the subagents separately to work in parallel to go and complete all of the different documents, right? So this is interesting in the sense where it will probably be attacking things a lot more efficiently and quicker. Now, I don't know if that will impact quality, but I think a lot of it will come in the testing itself. We're not expecting to build a perfect agent from the ground up. On the first try, the idea is you will review how these systems work in application and then fix once you have run enough tests. I thought it was interesting to highlight the fact that it's taken a different approach to the pre-production approach. And again, I view this as valid as well, right? It's just a different way of doing things. All right, so it's done with the entire build now. And as I was reviewing its plan as well as what it was building, the other thing that it made a change on, which again, I am interested to see how this comes to life. But basically what it's doing is it's going to be creating each image one by one to create the frame first inside of Figma MCP. And then only after then will it run the script to then go and build So this is quite interesting in the sense where I'm not so sure when the assets are going to be. Oh, it's actually the pre-production is when they are actually doing all of the. Yeah, it's already running all of the images inside of the pre-production stage. So that's a different flow from what I had envisioned. Okay, so it is done now. What's this creative reviewer? This is empty. It is done now. So a few things that as it was building, I was just going through one by one. I think that the creative director frames will be super interesting in the sense where it's giving the frame around creative philosophy, the signature techniques, how you evaluate ideas and etc. Right? So I thought that was quite interesting. You've got all these individuals from the ad industry, and this is great in the sense where you are taking everything that has been trained on to then create different frames, right? And then we also have, this is the one that I feel might be a bit too much guardrails in terms of the creation of these ads. It's giving the exact structure, and what might happen with these very heavy guardrails is that it might just produce things that are a bit too homogeneous, in my opinion. But again, like, it's worth testing first before deciding that this is too much. But this is what my gut tells me. How much detail is being put into the structure, particularly when I look at the call to action ads and you've got one big bold statement and it's got things like typography is the visual, right? Minimal to no imagery. Like that to me sells a bit too hard sell for my liking. But again, let's try it out, right? And see what comes out of it, especially if you're adding more framing to it. So what would be very interesting is how David Ogilvy would frame a call to action ad, right? That would be very interesting indeed. So it's done. We've got the scripts done as well. I'm going to connect everything up, like for example, give it my file key, and then we will set up a test and we'll be back again. Okay, I've done a bit of setup in terms of pulling out an example brand. And what I'll be using in the interest of time to test this out is one of the brands that I ran a report for in my previous video when we were running the business profiler workflow and skill. So the example that I've chosen is Claude.ai, basically a hardware that allows for you to record your meetings in person and online. And it has done a pretty comprehensive report for the business, right? So the entire profile. So this is a 15-page long report about the business as a whole. So this would go into like your company wiki. You will have audience data here as well. And you will also have brand data. Obviously, this is me from the outside auditing the brand. So this might not be the most accurate, but again, this is just an example, right? And also talking about its marketing here. So there'll be plenty of information for the Creative Copilot to extract to then fill up its context. And the other thing that I also included is some examples of the product, its logos, its website, and these can all be used as references in order to build out the context for the example that we have here. So things like brand guidelines when it comes to tone of voice, visual identity, these things can be filled up by referencing the examples here. Yeah. So what I'm going to do right now is just instruct it. I have included a folder called example-brand that has got an example of a brand that I want you to use to build out the context documents. The other thing that I have done is I've included a couple of brand examples inside of the brand examples folder. And you can also use that to basically fill up the brand guidelines. And what might be worthwhile is for you to go through each of these screenshots and see what might be relevant to go into the brand guidelines as reference images. So go ahead and read through all of the stuff I've added and then build out the context for the Copilot to be using when we run our tests in a bit. So using Whisperflow, giving it information and giving it an instruction to build out the context documents. Okay, so it is done with uploading and updating the context documents. I'm looking through the visual identity document and this looks pretty good. It's got typography, secondary font, logo usage, photography and image style, which is good. One thing that came to my mind right now is we need to have a product shot inside of context, so then it knows to pull that specific product image when creating a campaign, right? So I'm going to tell the agent to work on that for me. Okay, inside the context folder, I think it will be worthwhile for us to have a subfolder inside that is called product-images. I want you to move the product images from brand examples into that new subfolder. And I think it's also important for us to make sure that the plot logos are more firmly referenced inside of the brand-examples and also in the entire workflow here. So one thing that I would want to do right now is to separate the logo creation from the image generation, and what we will do is we will place the logo as a part of the Figma workflow. So the reason why I want to do this is because I don't want the image generation to be too crowded with the need to also place the logo in the right place, right? So what we do then instead is we separate that out of the background generation or the image generation process, and then we just assemble it at the end. So the final assembly step will be background image, creative copy, and then placing the right logo into the image. And again, by separating those from the overall image generation, it gives me a lot more control when I edit things down the line. So again, we are slowly, progressively adding or changing out the workflow as we build. And what you will find is that that's quite a common thing when you're building out your agents. It is having a workflow in mind, having it deployed by Claude Code itself, and then as you go through what's being built and as you think through it a bit more, there will be evolution in how you think about the steps and what gets deployed when. So being a bit flexible and dynamic is required, and this is the process that we will go through round after round as we build, never expecting to get it right in the first try, but slowly getting towards the end output through iterations, through usage. And I will run through one round of usage right now before we wrap up this video. I will then talk about quality of output, what are the things that we can fix to get it closer to being production ready, and progressively move this agent towards being completely autonomous, where I would just send it a prompt and it is fine-tuned enough to be able to just remove all of the human in the loop steps so that it can then produce your 50 assets with just one prompt, right? But the process of getting there is many rounds of iterations, which we will go through the first round of iteration in this video. But in order for us to get to the end output of it running autonomously, you will need to go through many rounds of outputs. All right, so let's run the test right now. Here's a prompt that I'm just gonna speak out the prompt with Whisperflow. Okay, so I want to create 20 novel ideas for the latest campaign that I have for the Claude Code Pro. Specifically, this campaign will have a blend of features as well as call to action or offer-based ads, right? So I think we want 15 feature ads and 5 offer ads in its final output. And we're looking to create 20, but again, we can probably generate 30 to 40 and then pick the best out of them. So yeah, that's the brief. Let's go ahead and ideate to kick off the process. Right, so sending the prompt over, again, it captured some of my initial conversation, but that's fine. Let's see how it does. Does it spin up the skill correctly? If it doesn't, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to probably have to invoke it, right? But some of these initial process would be a bit slower, or rather like when you run it the first few times, it might not register ideate, right? So yeah, let's cancel this. And what I'm gonna do is I am just gonna spin up something completely new. And this time I'm just gonna use /ideate instead. Because I think what had happened is maybe the description inside of the skill needs fine tuning, right? Yeah, so description phase 1 generate. So this description is not great, right? And therein lies the problem. It doesn't actually invoke the skill. So what I need to do is, because the way that these things have been designed is designed as commands as opposed to skills. So that's something that I need to fix down the line as I improve the system, right? So I'm just gonna copy this. I'm just gonna paste it, right? So what will happen is it will now straight up use the ideate workflow as opposed to this where it had to search for patterns. I think it did a pretty good job at it. What I want is I want something more cohesive, right? And again, it's not spinning up the idea skill, which tells me that I'll probably need to fix that down the line. But yeah, it's reading the right things, which is the company wiki, the brand position, the target audience. So I'm just gonna go through this entire process offline, and every time there is something to fix, I will spin up the recording again and talk about it. But yeah, we've already seen one of the challenges that we have in terms of building out this workflow. Okay, so this is the response that is given to me. The reason why it says that there's already a campaign for Node Pro April 2026 is because of the previous session that I ran. I'm going to terminate this. So yeah, it's fine. It's not changing or any issue. There isn't any issues with it. Now, it's asking me for the creative director frames. And I think for me, what I want to do is I probably want to use Clow, Bernbach, and let's try Alex Rogowski as frames. So I don't want the rest of them. And let's run only feature and offer ads. And right now it's running 18 subagents with 10 ideas each. So that's 180 raw ideas. That's pretty interesting in terms of the volume, but let's give it a go, right? Actually, no, it's going to be a lot less. We've got 3 times 2. And I'm going to ask it, what's the numbers this comes up to? Okay, you've got about 36 survivors, which is fine because we're looking for 20. And again, what we can do is we can also expand each idea into multiple variants. So let's go. So we've kicked off the process and we are seeing it loading the 3 director frames here. So as opposed to load all of them, it's only loading the ones that I say I want. And then right now it's going to fan out to the 6 subagents. And what it's going to do is it's invoking the subagents that was generated here, right? And that's the idea generator here. So you can see it's given a creative director frame. It's going to be given an ad archetype, and then it's given the brand context, etc. And then what's going to happen is it will generate 10 concepts each. And down the line, part of what we can do to tune it is to actually increase this to 20 concepts. So then what you might get from that is more of the fringe ideas. But again, a lot of that will be tuning down the line once we have done enough testing. So yep, it's fan out the 6 idea generator subagents. It's gonna run, and then what it will do then is it will review and deduplicate and write the ideas.md for my review. Right, took about 15 minutes to get this done. Basically 60 subagents return 60 raw ideas. The reviewer cut 25 to aggregate, leaving 35 survivors. And it's dropped into ideas.md. So that's over here. And what I've done is okay, the mix here is 22 feature ads, 13 offer ads. And yeah, it covers all 3 audiences. Part of the brief, right, is that I should give what audience I'm going after. So part of the workflow should be, can you ask and clarify what audience? Now, when I was looking at this, I basically gave it a brief and it went straight into production. Or rather, like, it didn't actually offer much deliberation between the 2 of us. We could be, I mean, that's part of maybe not spinning up the ideation skill, or it could just be me needing to tune the ideas a bit, or rather me needing to tune the workflow a bit better. But I think let's take a look at some of the ideas here that's been generated. There's quite a lot of them. I will not go through in great detail all of them. I will just, again, do a review and I'll give you a point of view once I'm done. Alright, so I've taken a look at a lot of the ideas here. To be honest, I think it's done its job in terms of creating a high degree of diversity. Like, we have everything from an ADHD focused idea, my brain has no save button, to something that's very interesting, which is a minimalist symmetry illustration, right? So this is pretty cool. The thought graveyard. So that's where your ideas have gone to die because you weren't able to capture it. The empty chair talks about the most productive person in the meeting isn't sitting down, right? Like the person on the whiteboard. I relate to this because I'm always on the whiteboard in the office, right? I can be everywhere, sit nowhere, and it still picks up what I'm saying. And then there's one about the meeting tax, right? Every meeting costs double. Yours don't have to. Then there's one that talks about the shredder, which is how we used to be writing handwritten notes, and then we're saying, forget about it. We don't need to be wasting all of that paper anymore. So it's definitely hit the mark in terms of diversity. One thing that also makes me think about improvement would be how we go about giving it better briefs to say what feature do we want to focus on, because again, we're getting a lot of diversity around the feature here. And you even have things like offline recording, which is great in my opinion, but if you want more focused productions for your campaign, giving it more details around what features you want to sell will also help. So this one's also interesting, is using the 50-hour battery life, and it's basically saying that the plot has got better battery than your phone, you know? So that's pretty wild and fun, to be honest. So yeah, I'm pretty happy with it. Gone ahead to approve all of the ideas. I think what might be fun to do just as an exercise is let's just approve all of it and then let's just run with it. Yep, so basically saying that let's move all of it forward and let's continue. Okay, it's gonna check out the boxes for me. Thanks, agent. Okay, now the review skill. Okay, the reason why it wasn't working is because in the skill itself, let's take a look. It's disabled the model invocation. So what that means is that it's the design of the skill that it had proceeded with is that you have to actually type in the slash command, right? So I'm gonna just say no variance. Let's move forward. Because we already have 35 concepts, we don't actually need that many variants, in my opinion. So now what it's going to do now is it's going to create detailed production briefs. So for the next step, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to run this in the background. I'm just going to push it along to see what it produces for me at the end of the day. And now I'll show you the output at the end. So it's written a approved ideas, and what this basically is all the final ideas, giving it a bit more detail around the visual direction and the copy direction. So the brief is pretty solid, I would say. It even has things like composition, left, right side, color palette. I like this quite a bit. So yeah, we can go ahead into pre-production. Right, so we've reached the next gate in terms of approval. What I had done is I've gotten it to go ahead and produce the images, and what I realized was in the script it wasn't actually ingesting any of the reference documents in the creation of the ads, so it came out really generic. So I had to do a bit of a detour in terms of fixing the script. But what has happened is after fixing it and getting it to make sure that it uses reference images, for example, the product image, it has gone ahead to go and create all of the ads, right? So all 35 of them. Now, before switching on the recording again, I had a run through in terms of the quality, and I think no surprises in terms of your first generation and not having any improvement done on the workflow, or not even criticizing what best practice in terms of prompts for the image generation model. The expectation is that you are probably gonna not run into a lot of good output. And that's something that I feel a lot of videos don't show you, the process around refining and seeing the nuances of different scenarios from which you will need to do a lot of tuning. And I'll go through some of what I'm thinking about in terms of tuning by reviewing a lot of the outputs we'll go through now, right? We won't fix it in this session, obviously, but I want to be able to show you the honest output that you would get and the fixes that you would need to make to get it to a point where it's production ready. Okay, so first of all, I think that this specific ad is not so bad, but you will notice that it hasn't done a very good job in terms of following the brief, which is not to have any text in the image generation. So this is a problem here, but you can see that from a generation standpoint, this is not bad. This one has missed the product altogether, which means to say it's a no-go completely. Now, this is where you're beginning to see the lack of reference images being problematic, because the plot itself is a really thin product. And what we're seeing here is that it's clearly not, it doesn't have that context, that it's a very thin device, right? And you will see this across the multiple examples as I show you. And this is all related to the context. When I provided product images, okay, all I've given it is a flat image of the plot like this, but I've not given it the side profile. So this is an example of where context is important. Nothing in its context has given it the view that the plot is actually a thin product. So no surprises when we see the image that I generated, it doesn't have that information, so it assumes that it's going to be thick, like what you're seeing here, right? So that's another problem in the context. So this is not bad in terms of its deployment. The question is, how does this come together? Not so sure the quality of it. This is decent, and it's been able to clearly articulate that it's thin. So this generation got it right. The next generation, again, you're seeing that the thickness is the problem here, right? And when we look at, say, the app graveyard, this one's okay, but I wouldn't call this generation really that fantastic in terms of what it's showing here. So definitely in terms of quality, we're not there, not anywhere close. But then again, this has been about an hour and a half worth of building the agent. So the expectation would be, this is what you should be expecting. If you spend less than 2 hours building this, then there will be a lot of gaps in terms of what the end output looks like. And you can tell in this image specifically, it didn't even quite get the product image right. The credit card that remembers, this one is not too bad because it's showing you the comparison to the credit cards. Now, something that I will need to check in on again, because we're using Nano Banana 2, the other thing to test on is also Nano Banana Pro to see if it does a better job in terms of being able to generate better output, because what we're seeing here is we've got, you know, jumbled up writing, which is atypical of Nano Banana. So I've been using primarily Nano Banana Pro at work, but this is using Nano Banana 2 as a test as well, right? So then the next variant that we're seeing here is this one, which to me has got all the text and completely doesn't work at all. The empty chair, and you're seeing how the plot itself is being placed on the table. There's just simply no way for the plot to sit like this. It has to be flat on the table. This tells me ultimately that it's not trained on how to place the product, which means to say I need to give it a lot more context. Now, if we looked at the training data that I gave it, the context for brand examples, everything here shows the plot products in its flat format, or it's showing examples of the interface within the phone itself. Nothing shows how it's placed on the table. So if I was going to generate any images from which the plot is on the table, I need to train with that data, right? I need to give that context to it, which I haven't given, and hence the output is pretty poor. So let's carry on. Again, it's a lady speaking into it, but it's having this shiny orange button, which is not how it works. Again, because I've not given it the context, right? And this is showing the plot being attached at the top of the car, not great. So conceptually, I think overall what you can see is that conceptually it was able to produce really great ideas, but how it then translates those ideas into image prompts was basically not leveraging enough prompt, like it was not given enough direction on how do you get from great idea to then great visual, right? Because in this specific workflow that was designed, we went from ideate straight into pre-production, right? Which doesn't actually even specifically explain how you would bring to life the visual of an idea. It just goes straight into writing the prompt. So you probably will require an additional step in between the creation of the prompt with the idea. There's a missing skill in that piece of the workflow which needs to be developed, right? And that missing piece that then converts a creative idea into its prompt will bridge that gap, right? So the key problems that we are seeing here is the context is not great. It doesn't cover enough things about the product to allow that product to be represented well in the ads. Second is going from idea to prompt and the art direction around how you need to be shooting some of these images that is completely missing, and hence you're seeing the gap in the quality. But yeah, I won't go through all of the details here. The other thing that we saw in this example is this is very messy, right? Because it has all of these folders and navigating each and every one of them is tough and not great for me as an experience. What it is doing right now is it's given me the pre-production review for me to then go through and approve before going into the final production, which is bringing things together, right? So what I will do to speed up the process is I'm just going to approve a few of these and then see how it does in terms of bringing things together on the Figma board. Okay, final step. What I had done was simply get it to run the final command, and it's taken the 8 approved images, right, that I randomly selected. I rejected 27 of them because I didn't approve them in Obsidian, and what it's done is it's placed it on the board inside of Figma, and you can then see all of your ads here. The reason why we are placing things inside of Figma is so that we have direct control over everything, right? From the typography, which clearly it hasn't used correctly. So this is a problem that I need to fix as well in the engineering of it. It's using inter. I believe that the typography is something else. And then obviously it's using a pretty cookie cutter way of placing the copy, right? It's all going to be at the bottom, which is not correct, right? Because you have white space at the top here, which is where it should be placing the copy. So it should be up here instead. But again, this is all in the refinement of the skill in the next steps when building anything for that matter. So yeah, I would say that this step did pretty okay. There's maybe about 20 to 30% more optimization to go to make sure that it's placing things in the right space, using the right typography, making sure that it's trained to place the right logo in the right place. But yeah, so this is about 20-30% more in terms of its optimization. For me, the big gap right now is the quality of the generations. The ideas are great. You got a lot of novel ideas. You got a lot of interesting ideas. It's just the missing art direction component in this entire process that is missing. And part of it, I believe, is because the model decided to skip one additional step. Like, for example, copywriting skill to then push into the final copy, and then after that there's this skill that is supposed to do a lot more heavy lifting than just straight up spitting out a prompt, right? So yeah, that's the improvement that needs to happen. Overall, I would say that if I did a review on this entire workflow and about 2 hours worth of work along with testing, ideation, killed it. Pre-production, big gap. Production, about 70-80% there, right? And it will probably take another half a day in terms of running tests and running optimizations, building out that additional step inside of pre-production to get it to a level where you could comfortably deploy 50. I think it will, if you think about the progression curve on producing a lot of these things to a point where it's ready, you can get it to like a comfortable level where to get it to a perfect level will probably take another week. But yeah, that's basically where we're at. Let me know if you would want me to do a part 2 that goes through getting this to, fixing the problems and getting this to reach a level where we would ship this as something that is usable. There's a lot more that we can do, obviously, because again, the skills can be improved significantly apart from building out more skills that allows for us to do the art direction better. Let me know if you want a part 2 of this.